The letter arrived at the Donnelly Ranch on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 1879, carried by a writer who seemed almost apologetic about delivering it. And Noah Donnelly stood in the golden dust of his front yard, reading it 3 times before he let himself believe what it said. He had written to Lucy Hawthorne 6 weeks prior, a careful and considered letter, the kind of letter a man writes when he has spent 3 nights chewing the end of his pen and staring at a blank page by lamplight. He had heard about her from his neighbor, old Cal Briggs, who had a cousin in Millhaven, Texas, and that cousin had spoken highly of Miss Lucy Hawthorne, the schoolteacher's daughter who had taken over the schoolhouse herself after her father passed. Cal had said she was smart and steady, and not the kind of woman who fell apart when the wind blew hard. Those were the qualities Noah valued. He had written to her with an offer, plain and honest. He was a rancher with good land, a solid house, and the intention of building something lasting in the hill country of Texas. He was 28 years old. He was not a bad man. He was looking for a partner in the truest sense of the word, someone to share the work and the life, and perhaps in time the kind of warmth that made a house feel like a home. He had not expected her to say yes immediately. He had hoped for a reply that showed interest, perhaps some questions, a cautious opening. What he received instead was a letter that was polite, gracious, and absolutely firm. He read it again in the shade of his porch, his hat pushed back on his head, the late April sun warming the back of his neck. She had written, in a hand that was neat and controlled, and somehow conveyed a great deal of personality even in its restraint, that she appreciated his honesty and the respectful nature of his correspondence. She had written that she was sure he was a decent man. She had written that she was not, however, in a position to accept any such offer at this time, and she did not anticipate being in such a position in the foreseeable future. She had thanked him sincerely for thinking of her. She had signed it with her full name, Lucy Ann Hawthorne, and something about the formal fullness of the signature made Noah feel the finality of it even more sharply than the words themselves. He folded the letter and held it between his 2 hands for a long time. His ranch hand, a wiry and sun-darkened man named Pete Alcott, who had worked for him for 4 years and treated frankness as a virtue, leaned against the fence post nearby and watched him with knowing eyes. "Bad news?" Pete asked. She said no, Noah said. Pete was quiet for a moment. The schoolteacher. Pete scratched the back of his neck. "You going to write back?" Noah looked out across his land, the gentle roll of it, the live oak trees standing like old friends along the creek line, the grass beginning to green after a dry winter. He had built this place with his hands. He had plans for it that stretched years into the future. He had imagined sharing those plans with someone who could understand the value of them, who could stand beside him and see not just what was here but what could be. "No," he said, "I'm not going to write back." Pete tilted his head, surprised. "I'm going to go there," Noah said. Pete stared at him. To Millhaven. That's 4 days' ride." "I know how far it is, Pete." Pete was quiet again, and then a slow grin broke across his weathered face. "Well," he said, "I suppose if a man is going to be turned down, it might as well be to his face." Noah was already moving toward the stable. The ride to Millhaven took him through country that was by turns beautiful and brutal, which he thought was a fair description of Texas itself. He crossed 2 rivers, one of them swollen from recent rains, and camped 3 nights under skies so thick with stars it seemed almost absurd. He thought about what he was doing. He was not an impulsive man by nature. He thought things through carefully. He liked order and planning and the satisfaction of work done well. But something about Lucy Hawthorne's letter had lodged itself in him like a splinter, not painfully, exactly, but with a persistent awareness he could not dismiss. It was not simply that she had said no. He could respect that. What lingered was something in the way she had written, the precision of the language, the particular phrase, not in a position to accept, which was different from having no interest. Not in a position suggested something preventing her rather than an absence of inclination. And the signature, formal and complete, as if she were defending herself with her own full name. He had no way of knowing whether he was reading too much into a few lines of ink. But he had spent his life reading land and weather and livestock, learning to see what was actually there rather than what he wished to see, and something in him was certain there was more to this letter than its surface. He arrived in Millhaven on a Friday afternoon in early May, when the town was just beginning to settle into the lazy warmth of a spring evening. It was not a large town. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a post office, a bank that looked newer than everything around it, a church at the far end with a small schoolhouse set back beside it, a blacksmith's shop, a livery stable, a few houses scattered with varying degrees of care. He rode to the livery first, arranged for his horse, a patient bay gelding named Copper, to be looked after, and then stood in the street and took the town in for a moment. He had not written ahead to say he was coming. He had considered it and decided against it. If he wrote ahead, she could prepare another refusal, neat and gracious as the first one. He wanted to speak to her directly. He wanted her to see him as a person, not a proposal on paper. He found a room at the small boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Elva Prout, who was somewhere in her 60s and had the sharp, observant eyes of someone who had lived long enough to find people endlessly interesting. She gave him a clean room and asked his business in town, and he told her he had come to call on someone. "Anyone I'd know?" she asked, with the cheerful directness of a woman who knew everyone. "Miss Hawthorne," he said, "the school teacher." Mrs. Prout's eyebrows rose in an expression that was equal parts curiosity and something more complicated. "Is that so?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Do you know her?" "I know everyone in Millhaven, young man," she said. "And Lucy Hawthorne is one of the finest people in it." She paused, studying him with those sharp eyes. "She know you're coming?" "No, ma'am," he said. She looked at him for another moment, and whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her somewhat. "Supper's at 6, she said, and left him to his room. He washed the trail off himself as best he could, changed his shirt, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed for a few minutes, gathering himself. He was not nervous, exactly. He was not the kind of man who frightened easily, but he was aware that what he was about to do required something more than nerve. It required honesty. He had been honest in his letter. He intended to be honest in person. He was going to tell her exactly what he had come to say, and then he was going to listen to what she said in return, and he was going to respect it. If she looked him in the eye and told him plainly that she had no interest whatsoever, he would thank her and leave. He would not pressure her. He would not beg. He was not that kind of man either. He just wanted the chance to be real to her, instead of only being words on a page. The schoolhouse was quiet when he walked past it late that afternoon, the children long gone home, but there was a lamp burning inside, and through the window he could see someone moving, tidying the room, stacking primers on a shelf with methodical care. He stopped. She was tall for a woman, he thought, and the lamp caught the dark auburn of her hair where it had come loose from its pins over the course of the day. She was wearing a plain brown dress and an apron, and she was moving through the room with an efficiency that suggested she did not waste motion, that everything she did had purpose. He stood very still and watched her for a moment, not in a way that was improper, but in the way a man stands still before a thing that surprises him, before he has figured out exactly what he is feeling. He went and knocked on the door. There was a pause inside, then footsteps. The door opened, and Lucy Hawthorne looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them spoke for the space of several heartbeats. She had brown eyes. Dark, level, intelligent eyes that took him in with an assessment so frank and unself-conscious that it almost made him smile. "Miss Hawthorne," he said, "my name is Noah Donnelly." He watched the recognition move across her face. He watched her understand. And he watched something else cross there too, something quick and complicated that was there and gone before he could name it. "Mr. Donnelly," she said, and her voice was steady, composed, betraying nothing. "I received your letter." "I received yours as well," he said. "That's why I'm here." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she stepped back from the doorway. "You had better come in," she said. The schoolhouse smelled of chalk and wood smoke and the particular dusty sweetness of old books. There were small desks arranged in neat rows, a larger desk at the front, a blackboard behind it still bearing the remnants of a mathematics lesson that had been only partially erased. On the shelf behind her desk were stacked not only school primers, but also several volumes that had nothing to do with teaching children, a collection that included what appeared to be a worn copy of Middlemark and a book on soil cultivation and one on Texas land law. He noticed these things because he noticed everything, because he was a man who paid attention, and because they told him something. She closed the door and turned to face him, and she had her composure fully assembled now, her hands folded in front of her and her chin level, and she looked like a woman who was prepared to be reasonable and fair and absolutely immovable. "I said what I meant in my letter," she said. "I hope you didn't make a long journey on the basis of a misunderstanding." 4 days, he said, "and I didn't misunderstand you, I understood you clearly. I just had things I wanted to say that couldn't be said properly on paper." "Such as?" He took a breath. "May I sit down?" A brief hesitation. Then she gestured toward one of the adult chairs near her desk. She sat down in her own chair across from him, and the desk between them felt like a line of demarcation, clear and deliberate. He placed his hat on his knee and looked at her. "I know what you wrote," he said. "You said you weren't in a position to accept, not that you weren't interested, not that the idea was impossible or foolish. You said you weren't in a position." Something moved in her eyes. "You read carefully," she said. "I've been told that," he said. "Miss Hawthorne, I'm not here to push you into anything you don't want. I want you to understand that plainly. I came because I thought you deserved to know that what I wrote to you wasn't some calculation I made out of convenience. I'm not looking for a housekeeper with a marriage certificate. I'm looking for someone to build something with. And from everything I was told about you, and from the letter you wrote back to me, I thought maybe you were the kind of person who might understand what I meant by that." She was very still. The lamp between them made small shadows and bright places across her face. "What you were told about me," she said carefully. "What were you told?" "That you were smart," he said. "That you were steady. That you had taken on your father's school after he died and run it so well the children were learning more than they ever had. That you weren't the kind of woman who fell apart when things got hard." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a fair accounting," she said, and something in the words was both proud and a little tired. "Your letter was gracious," he said, "and it was firm, and I respected it, I do respect it. But I couldn't just ride away from the idea without at least giving you the chance to tell me no to my face, if that's what you mean. Because if it is, I'll tip my hat and leave and I won't trouble you again. But if there's something else that's in the way, I'd like to know what it is, because I think I might be able to address it." Lucy Hawthorne looked at him for a long time. She looked at him the way she had looked at his letter, he thought, with that same careful precision, reading not just the surface but what was underneath. "You are very direct," she said. "I've found it saves time," he said. And then, for the first time, something shifted in her face. The composure cracked just slightly, and underneath it was something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one, and it changed her face entirely, made her look younger and less armored. She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the empty street. The evening light was going gold. "My father died 14 months ago," she said. "He left me the house and a small amount of savings. He also left me the responsibility for the school, which the town needs and which no one else is qualified to run. And he left me with a debt I did not know about until after he was gone." Noah waited. He did not interrupt. "He had borrowed money from a man named Gerald Fitch," she said. "Fitch owns most of the land east of town. He's been buying up parcels for years. My father needed money when the school roof collapsed 3 winters ago and Fitch lent it to him." She paused, "At terms that were not fair but that my father perhaps did not fully understand. The debt has grown with interest to more than I can pay on a schoolteacher's wage. Fitch has been patient, or rather he has seemed patient." "Seemed," Noah said. She turned from the window. "He came to see me 2 months ago," she said. "He was polite, very polite. He told me that he understood my situation and that he was not an unreasonable man. He told me that there was a simple solution to the debt, in his view." She met Noah's eyes. "He asked me to marry him." Noah was very still. "He is 53 years old," she said. "He has buried 2 wives. He has a reputation in this county that I would describe charitably as difficult." A pause. "When I declined, he told me I had until the end of summer to settle the debt, or he would take the house." The room was quiet except for the small sounds of the evening outside, a horse somewhere down the street, the distant sound of the saloon starting to fill up. "And that is the position you are not in," Noah said slowly. "I am not in a position to take on a new life when my current one is not yet settled," she said. "I would not bring a debt that size and a fight with Gerald Fitch to any man's door, especially not a man I had never met." He nodded. He was thinking. "How much is the debt?" he said. She named a figure. It was substantial for a schoolteacher. For a rancher who had been building his operation carefully over 8 years, it was manageable. "I can settle it," he said. She looked at him sharply, and he saw something flash in her eyes that was not gratitude but its opposite, a fierce, proud recoil from the idea of being rescued. "I did not tell you that to ask for your help," she said, and her voice had gone cooler, cleaner, with a warning in it. "I know that," he said. "You told me because I asked you what was in the way, and you're honest enough to tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. I'm not offering charity. I'm not trying to buy your agreement to anything. I'm saying that the obstacle you named is one I can remove, and that removing it doesn't obligate you to me in any way whatsoever." She stared at him. "But if I did remove it," he said, and his voice was careful and quiet, "then there would be nothing in the way of you making a free decision. Without pressure from Fitch, without a debt at your back, you could think about the question I actually asked you, which was whether you might want to build something with a man you hadn't met yet." "You would settle a debt for a stranger," she said slowly. "I would do it because you're not a stranger," he said. "You wrote to me. I wrote to you. I've thought about you more than I've thought about much else in the past 6 weeks, which is not nothing for a man who has a lot to think about." He paused. "I'm not asking for a guarantee. I'm asking for a fair chance." The silence stretched between them, and Lucy Hawthorne held herself very still, and he watched the war in her, the pride against the practicality, the fear against the something else that he could not yet name. "I would need to think about it," she said at last. "Of course," he said, and stood up and put his hat on. "I'm staying at Mrs. Pruitt's boarding house. I'll be here for as long as it takes." She looked up at him from where she stood, and for a moment she looked less like a woman holding herself together with both hands and more like a woman who was genuinely uncertain what to make of him, which he thought was probably the most honest thing she had shown him yet. "Good evening, Mr. Donnelly," she said. "Good evening, Miss Hawthorne," he said, and left. He sat with Mrs. Pruitt at supper that evening, along with 2 other boarders, a traveling salesman from Dallas and an older gentleman who seemed to be conducting some sort of geological survey of the county. Mrs. Pruitt fed them all very well and talked freely, as was her nature, and Noah found himself learning a great deal about Millhaven without having to ask many questions directly. He learned that Gerald Fitch was not universally liked. He learned that the schoolhouse had been a matter of community pride since Lucy's father, Ezra Hawthorne, had founded it 15 years ago, and that the town felt a protectiveness toward it and toward Lucy that was real but helpless, given that most of the residents were of modest means themselves. He learned that Fitch held notes on several properties in the county, and that this was a source of anxiety for more than one family. He learned that Lucy Hawthorne had 3 girls in her class who were the first in their families to learn to read properly, and that this was considered something of a miracle by their parents. He went to sleep that night thinking about what she had told him, about the pride in her and the exhaustion underneath it, about a woman who had taken on a dead man's work and a dead man's debt, and was carrying both of them with a composure that must sometimes feel like its own kind of weight. In the morning, he rode out to see the situation for himself. He found the land records at the county seat, a half-day's ride away, and he spent several hours reading through them. What he found confirmed what Lucy had told him and added some dimensions she might not have known. Fitch had a pattern. He had done this before, in a smaller way, with a farmer named Holt 2 years ago, and Holt had lost 40 acres of good grazing land. The interest rates Fitch charged were legal but only barely, and there was a question about whether the terms of Ezra Hawthorne's original loan had been properly disclosed, which was the kind of question that, if examined by a lawyer who knew what he was looking for, might yield interesting results. Noah was not a lawyer, but he had spent years navigating land deals and cattle contracts, and he knew how these things worked. He also knew a lawyer in San Antonio who was as sharp as a new blade and who owed him a favor. He rode back to Millhaven with his mind working steadily, methodically, the way it did when he was solving a problem on the ranch, breaking it into pieces and addressing each one in order. He did not go to see Lucy that day. He thought it was important that she have time to think without feeling that he was pressing on her, and besides, he had things to arrange. He wrote a letter to his lawyer in San Antonio that evening, laying out what he had found in the land records and asking for an opinion on the legality of the loan terms. He sent it with the Morning Post. He spent the second day talking to people in town, which he did carefully and without drawing attention to his purpose. He was friendly and unhurried and asked questions in the way that seemed like natural conversation. He had a drink at the saloon and played a hand of cards with 3 men who turned out to be farmers and small ranchers from the surrounding area, and he learned from them that Fitch was planning to consolidate several parcels he had acquired into a larger holding that he intended to fence, which would cut off access to a water source that several smaller operations depended on. This was a larger problem than Lucy's house. This was the kind of problem that had turned ugly in other parts of Texas, where land consolidation and fencing were generating genuine conflict. He noted it and said nothing. On the afternoon of the second day, he was sitting on the porch of Mrs. Pruitt's boarding house with a cup of coffee when Lucy Hawthorne walked up the street. She was carrying a basket over one arm coming from the direction of the general store, and she almost walked past without looking up, and then she did look up and she saw him and she stopped. He stood. "Mr. Donnelly," she said. "Miss Hawthorne," he said. "Can I walk with you?" She considered him. "I was going back to the schoolhouse," she said. "Then I'll walk that way," he said. She allowed it. They walked side by side through the late afternoon, not too close, the proper distance of people who were still measuring each other, and for a while neither of them spoke, which Noah found he did not mind. She was not someone who needed to fill silence, which he appreciated. "I thought about what you said," she offered eventually. "And," he said, "I don't know what to make of you," she said. "Honestly, men don't generally ride 4 days to argue with a letter." "I didn't come to argue," he said. "I came to talk." She glanced at him. There was a slight tightening at the corner of her mouth that might have been amusement. "There is a distinction there," she conceded. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "What would you do," he said, "if Fitch were not in the picture? If there were no debt and no pressure and no deadline, what would you want?" She was quiet for a moment. They had reached the schoolhouse and she stopped outside the door, turning to face him, the basket still on her arm. "That's not a question I've been able to afford to ask myself," she said. "I know," he said, "but I'm asking you to try." She looked past him, out across the empty schoolyard, where the dust lay still in the late light. Something in her face went thoughtful and far away. "My father built this school because he believed that knowing things mattered," she said. "He believed that a child who could read had a different kind of future than one who couldn't. That if you understood how things worked, the land, the law, numbers, you had a better chance." She paused. "I believe that too, and I've been afraid that if I left, this school would close because there's no one else to run it, and those children would lose something that they deserve to have." "That's not an answer to my question," he said gently. She looked back at him and her eyes were sharp again, not defensive exactly but careful. "What would I want?" she said. "For myself." Yes, he said. Another silence, and then something in her yielded just slightly, not in defeat but in honesty. I would want to build something, she said. I would want a partner who understood what that meant. I would want land and space and the kind of work that matters. She paused. I would want children who had books. He looked at her, she looked at him. My ranch, he said quietly, does not have a school, but it has a house with 3 rooms that I built myself and intend to add to. It has good land and a creek that doesn't dry up in August. It has a library, of a sort, 20-some volumes that I have collected over the years, including 2 that I think you would probably want to argue with. He paused, and there is a town 8 miles away where there is a school that has been without a teacher for 2 years, and the families in that town would be very grateful to someone who knew how to run one. She stared at him. You know about the school in Harrow, she said, naming the town. I found out yesterday, he said. I've been learning about the territory. You've been doing research, she said. And now the thing at the corner of her mouth was unmistakably a smile, small and real, and nothing like the composed mask she had presented to him at first. I'm a careful man, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, and he let her look because he understood that she was reading him the way he read land, looking for what was actually there. I'm not going to make any decision in a hurry, she said. I want to be clear about that. Whatever you are offering, it requires thought. It requires knowing you better than I know you now. Then let me stay a while, he said. Let me be here and you can form your own opinion at your own pace. I'm not going anywhere. You have a ranch, she pointed out. You have obligations there. Pete Alcott is a capable man, he said. I've wired him. She shook her head slowly, but the smile was still there. You are very sure of yourself, she said. No, he said honestly. I'm not sure of myself at all. I'm just sure that you're worth the time. She was silent for a moment. Then she shifted the basket on her arm and straightened, and when she spoke her voice had found a careful middle ground between openness and caution. I have a habit of taking a walk along the creek in the evening when the teaching is done for the day, she said. It helps me think. Is that an invitation? He said. It's information, she said, and she went inside. He stood in the schoolyard for a moment, and then he put his hat on and walked back to Mrs. Prout's, and he was smiling. Over the following days, something began to unfold that neither of them entirely planned for, and both of them felt with increasing clarity. He began to meet her in the evenings by the creek, which wound behind the town through a grove of cottonwood trees that were in full young leaf, throwing dappled green shadows over the water. They walked and they talked, and what they talked about was everything, not small talk, not careful testing conversation, but the real kind. She told him about her father, Ezra Hawthorne, a man of great conviction and some impracticality, who had believed in education with a religious fervor and who had not been good with money. She told it without bitterness, only with a kind of clear-eyed love. She told him about growing up in this small town, about the years before her mother died when she was 11, about learning to read Greek alongside the beginning readers at her father's school, because her father said that if you were going to teach, you had better know more than anyone you taught. He told her about his own growing up in Missouri, the farm his parents had owned that had been taken by the bank after 3 consecutive bad harvests, the way his father had aged 10 years in 2 and never entirely recovered. He told her about coming to Texas at 20 with almost nothing, working cattle for 3 years to save enough to lease his first plot of land, and then the slow, careful work of building from there. That's why the land matters to me the way it does, he said one evening, watching the creek move over its shallow, rocky bed. Because I know what it feels like to lose it. I know what it does to a family when the ground goes out from under them. She was quiet, listening, sitting on a fallen cottonwood at the water's edge with her shoes set neatly beside her and her feet in the grass. That's why I've been so careful, she said softly, with the debt with Fitch. My father lost the ground from under us and I didn't realize it until he was already gone. I'm not willing to let that happen again. I know, he said. That's not weakness, that's sense. She looked at him. Most people think it's stubbornness, she said. Most people are wrong, he said. He received the response from his lawyer in San Antonio on the 5th day. His suspicion had been correct. The interest terms on the original loan were irregular in a way that, under Texas law, had implications for the enforceability of the debt. The lawyer had taken the liberty of consulting the relevant statutes and was of the opinion that, properly challenged, the debt could be reduced significantly or dismissed entirely, provided Lucy could produce the original loan documentation. He went to see her at the schoolhouse that morning, during the midday break when the children were eating their lunches outside. He explained what he had found. He handed her the lawyer's letter and waited while she read it, and he watched her face as she read, watched the careful eyes moving over the words, watched the understanding arrive. When she finished, she set the letter down on her desk and was very still for a moment. "You did this," she said. "I made some inquiries," he said. "The legwork was done by a lawyer I trust." "You did this for me," she said, and her voice had a tone in it he hadn't heard before, something stripped back and open. "I did it because it was the right thing to do," he said. "The man is a predator and he's been doing this to people in this county for years. You happen to be the current case." She stood up and walked to the window, and he could see from the set of her shoulders that she was doing what she did when she was trying to manage feeling something, containing it, ordering it. "Do you have the original loan documents?" he asked. "My father kept everything," she said. "Everything." He was disorganized in many ways, but he never threw away a piece of paper. "They'll be at the house." "Then I'd like your permission to have my lawyer write to Fitch," he said, putting him on notice that the loan terms are being contested. That alone should be enough to stop any immediate action he's considering. She turned from the window. She was composed again, but not in the way she had been in the beginning, not the wall of composure she had put up when she first opened the schoolhouse door to him. This was something softer and more real. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "Truly, and I don't mean the legal matter, I mean all of it. You rode 4 days. You have stayed more than a week. You have gone through land records and written to lawyers. A man doesn't do all of that for a woman he has never met." "No," he agreed, "he doesn't." "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with the same care he chose everything. "I have been building something for 8 years," he said, "and for most of that time it has felt like the right thing to be doing. The work has meaning to me. The land has meaning. But there's a point you get to, when you've built enough that you can see the shape of the future, where the absence of someone to share it with stops being an abstraction and becomes something real. Something you feel in the day, in the evenings, in the quiet. I could have looked for someone closer to home. I could have been less particular, but I'm a careful man, Miss Hawthorne, and when Cal Briggs described you to me, something in me said that is someone worth knowing, and I have been proving myself right ever since." She looked at him for a long time. "You are not at all what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" he said. "I expected someone older," she said, "or someone who had not thought as carefully as you have. Or someone whose offer was really just the language of an arrangement." She paused. "I did not expect someone who listened." "I'm a very good listener," he said. "I know," she said, and then quietly, "Thank you for the lawyer and for coming." "You're welcome," he said, "on both counts." She found the original loan documents that evening in a wooden box under her father's old desk, exactly as she had predicted. He sent them with the next day's post to San Antonio. During the following week, while they waited for the legal matter to develop, something changed between them that was quiet and gradual and entirely real. They no longer walked by the creek, with the careful spacing of 2 people measuring each other. They walked closer, their arms occasionally brushing, and the conversation between them had lost its formality entirely and become the kind of conversation that could go anywhere and usually did. She showed him the things about Millhaven that she loved, the way the light hit the limestone hills to the west in the late afternoon, the grove of pecan trees along the road south of town that an old settler had planted 40 years ago, and that produced in autumn, the small cemetery where her father was buried with a simple stone marker that said Ezra Thomas Hawthorne. He taught us. He told her about his ranch in detail, the creek, the live oaks, the house he had built with the intention of adding rooms to it as need arose. He described the view from the front porch at sunrise, which he had watched 500 times and never gotten tired of. He told her about the cattle operation and about Pete and about the 3-year plan he had for the property. "You've thought it all through," she said one evening. "Most of it," he said. "Not all. Some things you can't plan." "Like what?" He looked at her sidelong, and something in his eyes was warm and deliberate. "Like this," he said. She did not look away. She held his gaze, and the evening was warm around them, and the cottonwood leaves made their soft rushing sound in the slight breeze. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Then tell me," he said. "I think I may have made a mistake," she said carefully. "In my letter, not in the words exactly. The words were true as far as they went. But I think perhaps I used the practical reasons as a shield for the real one." "Which was?" She looked at the water. "I was afraid," she said. "That is not something I am accustomed to admitting. I'm not a woman who frightens easily. But the idea of trusting someone that completely, someone I did not know, and going to a place I had never seen and building something with a person who might turn out to be entirely different from what I imagined." She paused. "It was frightening. It was the most frightening thing I had ever been asked to consider." "And now," he said. She looked at him. "And now you are not a person I imagined," she said. "You are a person I know. Somewhat. Enough." "Enough for what?" he said quietly. "Enough that the fear has changed shape," she said. "It is still there, but it is no longer a reason to say no. It has become something else, something that feels more like anticipation." He reached out and took her hand. He did it simply, without drama, the way he did most things, and she looked down at their joined hands and then back up at him. "Lucy," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, and she felt it, the way you feel a key turn. "Noah," she said, and it was the first time she had used his, and something about it was like a door opening. The reply from San Antonio arrived the following week with a development that was even more satisfying than hoped. The lawyer had not only identified the irregularities in the loan terms, but had also found that Fitch had used similar methods in at least 2 other transactions in the county, and was suggesting that a collective challenge might be possible. He had already been in contact with the county court. Noah brought the letter to Lucy, and they sat together at her kitchen table and read it, and she made coffee, and they talked it through for 2 hours. By the end of it, they had agreed to contact the 2 other families Fitch had similarly exploited, the Holt family and another named Vasquez, who had lost a portion of their land the year before. "This is bigger than my debt," Lucy said. "Yes," he said. "It is. We should talk to them," she said. "To the Holts and the Vasquezes. They should know they may have legal recourse." "I agree," he said. She looked at him across the kitchen table. "You realize that by doing this you are making an enemy of Gerald Fitch," she said. "Fitch was never going to be a friend of mine," Noah said. She shook her head slowly, but she was smiling. It was the full smile now, the one he had been earning piece by piece over the past 2 weeks, the one that changed her entire face and made something in his chest ache with a warmth he had not expected to feel so strongly so soon. They rode out to see the Holts the next morning together, which caused a certain amount of comment in Millhaven's small community, Noah being aware that a single woman and a single man riding out together was not unremarked upon. He found that he minded this very little. Lucy seemed to mind it even less, which told him something. The Holt family, Tom and Maren and their 4 children, received them in a yard that was neat despite the evident poverty of it, and listened to what Noah and Lucy had come to say with the careful attention of people who had been let down before and had learned to guard their hope. Tom Holt was a big, quiet man with the hands of someone who had done nothing but hard physical work his whole life. He listened to the lawyer's assessment of the loan terms without expression, and when Noah finished speaking, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're telling me what Fitch did might not have been legal," Tom said. "I'm telling you a lawyer in San Antonio thinks there's a strong case," Noah said. "And that if a formal challenge is made, It's likely the debt would be substantially reduced and possibly dismissed, and that you might be entitled to have your land restored. Tom looked at his wife. Marin Holt was a compact, sun-weathered woman with very steady eyes, and she looked back at her husband and then at Noah and Lucy, and something in her face cracked open with a hope so painful it was almost hard to watch. "We'd have to involve the court," Tom said. "Yes," Noah said. "It's a legal process. My lawyer would handle the mechanics of it. What he needs from you is the original loan documentation and your agreement to participate." Tom was quiet again. His youngest child, a boy of about 4, was hanging off his leg and looking at the strangers with large, interested eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Tom said. "You don't know us." "Because it's right," Noah said simply. And because he had been the son of a man who lost his land, and he knew what it felt like, and he had the means and the knowledge to address this particular injustice and no good reason not to. Tom Holt held out his hand. Noah shook it. The Vasquez family, Eduardo and Rosa Vasquez, were similarly grateful and similarly cautious. Eduardo Vasquez was a man who had come to Texas from Sonora 15 years ago and built a small farm on the strength of his own labor, and he had a wariness toward systems of authority that Noah understood was not unfounded. In Texas, in 1879, a man like Eduardo Vasquez had reason to be careful about courts and lawyers and the machinery of official proceedings. "The lawyer in San Antonio," Eduardo said. "He is a trustworthy man. He's been my lawyer for 5 years," Noah said. "He has never steered me wrong." "He has worked for men like you," Eduardo said. "Men who have land and cattle. Why should he work for men like me?" "Because I'm paying him," Noah said. "And because he's a man who doesn't like what Fitch has been doing any more than we do." Rosa Vasquez put coffee in front of them and looked at Lucy. "You trust this man," she said, meaning Noah. "I do," Lucy said, and she said it without hesitation, and Noah felt those 2 words land in him like something warm and permanent. Eduardo and Rosa agreed to participate. They found their documents, copies of the original loan agreement, in a tin box that Rosa kept in the kitchen behind a loose stone in the hearth. The legal matter took shape over the following weeks, the San Antonio lawyer filing a formal challenge to all 3 loans simultaneously, which the county court agreed to hear in August. Fitch received notice of the proceedings by registered mail and was reported to be furious, a state that manifested in a brief and unpleasant visit to the Millhaven post office, where he made his displeasure loudly known, to no particular effect except that several people witnessed it, and it confirmed their existing opinion of his character. Noah stayed in Millhaven. He could not explain this in the practical terms he preferred any longer. The legal matter was in hand. Pete was managing the ranch capably, and he could have returned to his own business and waited for news. There was no practical reason to stay. He stayed because of Lucy. Because of evenings by the creek and mornings when he found excuses to be passing the schoolhouse when the children were coming in for the day, and she was standing at the door greeting each of them, remembering their names and the details of their lives, asking after a sick grandmother and complimenting a new haircut, because of the way she looked when she was teaching, which he had caught glimpses of through the open window, the absolute attention she gave to it. The way she made each child feel like what they were learning was something worth having. He stayed because she had begun to look for him in the evenings and to smile when she found him, and because the conversations between them had become the best part of his day, and because she had lent him the worn copy of Middlemarch and made him promise to tell her honestly what he thought of it. "It's long," he said, when they had been going back and forth about it for 3 days. "It is very long," she agreed, "and every word of it is necessary." "I'm not sure I agree about every word," he said. "Tell me which ones you'd cut," she said, and there was a challenge in her eyes that he suspected she issued to her older students when she wanted to see if they had actually thought something through. He liked arguing with her. She was precise and formidable and entirely willing to revise a position when presented with a compelling counterargument, which he found was a quality rarer and more valuable than most people seemed to understand. He also liked the quiet times, the evenings when they sat on the porch of her house, which she had agreed to allow when Mrs. Prout informed her firmly that she was being ridiculous about it, and watched the stars come out. The Texas night sky was extravagant in its generosity, throwing out more light than anyone strictly needed, and they sat in it and sometimes talked and sometimes did not. "Tell me about the ranch in spring," she said one such evening. "Describe it." He thought about how to do it. "The grass comes in green along the creek first," he said. "There's a stretch of it, maybe 40 feet wide, where the soil is deeper and richer than the land around it. And in April it's the kind of green that almost doesn't look real. And there are wildflowers in the fields, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. And in the morning when the light is still low they look like something out of a painting someone made up." She was quiet, listening. "The creek has a sound to it in spring," he said. "It's higher from the rains and it moves faster, and there's a particular bend where it goes over a flat shelf of limestone, and the sound it makes there is, I don't know, it's a good sound. It's the kind of sound that makes you stop whatever you're doing and just listen for a minute." "It sounds beautiful," she said softly. "It is," he said. "It's a beautiful piece of country. I have thought many times that it wants someone else to see it the way I see it. Because when you see something beautiful alone long enough, there's something that gets wasted in it." She looked at him, and in the darkness her face was soft and her eyes were bright. "Noah," she said. "Lucy," he said. "I have been thinking," she said, "that I would very much like to see that creek in spring." He was very still. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" he said. "I am saying," she said, slowly and clearly, as if she were working the words out for the first time and finding them exactly right as she spoke them, "that I would like to know you better for a while longer. And that I believe, based on the evidence thus far, that knowing you better is going to confirm the conclusion I am already reaching." She paused. "And that if the legal matter is resolved in August and the school year ends in June, then there is perhaps a reasonable amount of time in between for things to develop as they appear to be developing." He looked at her. She looked at him. And he reached across the space between them and tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face, a gesture so simple and natural that she seemed not to have expected it, and she went very still at the touch of his hand. "I'm in no hurry," he said. "And I'm not going anywhere." "I know," she said. "That's rather the point." He did not kiss her that evening. He thought about it and decided that she had offered him exactly what she was ready to offer, and that the right response to that was patience and warmth and the willingness to let her set the pace. She had been in control of very little in her life recently, he thought. She had been managing other people's expectations and other people's crises for a long time. He was not going to rush her. But he held her hand on the porch until the stars had moved a noticeable distance across the sky, and neither of them seemed inclined to let go. June arrived with a fullness and warmth that made Millhaven feel like a different town. Or perhaps it was only that Noah had been there long enough now to know it as a place with its own character and rhythms. He knew the baker by name, a man named Henry who started work before sunrise and left a paper sack of yesterday's rolls on Mrs. Prout's step most mornings. He knew which side of the saloon had the loosest floorboard, and which horse at the livery was the most difficult about being shod. He had helped Tom Holt repair a section of fence, and had spent a Sunday afternoon at the Vasquez farm helping Eduardo and his eldest son, a 16-year-old named Marco, rebuild a collapsed section of the well casing. He had become, in the way of a man who stayed somewhere long enough and was genuinely useful, a part of the life of the place. And Millhaven had taken him in the way small towns take in people who prove themselves patient and honest and willing to work, with a gradual warmth that was more genuine for being slow. The school year ended on the 14th of June, a Friday, with a small ceremony in the schoolyard that the whole town seemed to attend. Lucy had organized a recitation, and each of her students stood up in turn and read a passage aloud, and the parents watched with a pride that was sometimes tearful, especially in the case of the 3 children who were, as Mrs. Prout had told him weeks ago, the first in their families to read. Noah stood at the back of the gathering and watched Lucy move through it all, the quiet orchestration of it, the way she made it feel effortless from the outside, while he had seen enough of her preparation to know it was nothing of the sort. He watched her kneel down to be at eye level with a small girl who had gone shy at the last moment, watched her say something that made the child straighten her shoulders and walk to the front, and read her passage in a clear, carrying voice, and then look back at her teacher with a face full of triumph. Something in Noah's chest, some last remaining resistance to what was already happening, gave way entirely and quietly, like a snow drift in April, and he looked at the woman at the front of the gathered crowd and thought, with a certainty he had never felt about anything in his life as quickly, that he was going to love her for a very long time. After the ceremony, when the families had begun to disperse and the children had scattered with the released energy of the newly freed, he found her sitting on the schoolhouse steps, her hat in her hands and her face turned up to the afternoon sky. He sat down beside her. "Well," he said. "Well," she said and smiled. "You are very good at what you do," he said. "I love it," she said simply. "It's not difficult to be good at things you love." "I think that might be the wisest thing you've said yet," he said, "which is considerable." She laughed, a real laugh, one he had earned more of in the weeks since she had first allowed it, and he loved the sound of it, the way it was unguarded and full. "What happens now?" he said. She turned her head to look at him. They were sitting close on the step, shoulder to shoulder, and her eyes were warm and certain in a way that made his heart move. "Now," she said, "I think you should take me to see that creek." The summer between June and the August court hearing was one of the best stretches of time Noah Donnelly had ever lived through. He and Lucy arranged things properly and carefully, because she was a particular kind of woman who did things properly, which he respected completely. She came to the ranch, accompanied for the sake of propriety by Mrs. Prout, who declared herself delighted to see some new country, and who proved to be an excellent traveler for a woman of her years, and the three of them made the journey from Millhaven to Noah's land over 2 comfortable days. He watched Lucy see the ranch for the first time. He watched her take in the low hills and the live oaks in the creek, watched her see the house, which was solid and well-built and had a front porch that caught the morning sun. He watched her walk to the creek and stand at the limestone shelf where the water went over and made its particular sound, and he watched her go still and listen. She stood there for a long time. When she turned back to him, her face was open in a way that was almost startling after all the weeks of carefully managed composure. "It sounds exactly as you described it," she said. "It always does," he said. She looked at him. "I want to live here," she said. "I want to be clear about that because I am done with not being clear about what I want." He crossed the distance between them in a few steps and he kissed her, there by the creek in the late afternoon light with the water making its good sound over the limestone, and she kissed him back without hesitation, and Mrs. Prout, who was tactfully examining a wildflower some distance away, pretended not to have seen anything at all. That evening at supper, with Pete Alcott and Mrs. Prout both present, Noah proposed formally, with a directness that made Pete grin and Mrs. Prout press her hand to her heart, and Lucy said yes with a simplicity and a steadiness that was entirely her and more beautiful to him than any elaborate declaration could have been. The August court hearing resolved the Fitch matter with a completeness that satisfied everyone except Fitch himself. The county judge, having reviewed the legal challenge prepared by Noah's San Antonio lawyer, found the loan terms in all 3 cases to be in violation of Texas lending statutes and declared the debts void. The Holt family was awarded a formal judgment that restored the acreage they had lost 2 years before. Eduardo and Rosa Vasquez recovered their land as well. Lucy's family home was confirmed as hers without encumbrance. Gerald Fitch sat in the courtroom with the expression of a man who had not, until this moment, believed that the proceedings would go against him, and who was discovering that the world had changed around him while he was not paying attention. He said nothing in the courtroom. His lawyer, a man from the county seat who seemed somewhat embarrassed by the entire affair, collected his papers and they left, and that was the last public appearance Fitch made in Millhaven for some months. Tom Holt shook Noah's hand afterward for a long time, and Marin Holt embraced Lucy with a fierceness that clearly surprised Lucy and then clearly moved her. Eduardo Vasquez gripped Noah's shoulder and said, in the careful English he preferred for formal occasions, that he was grateful and that he hoped Noah and Lucy had a long and fortunate life. Rosa Vasquez kissed Lucy on both cheeks. In the street afterward, in the August heat, Lucy took Noah's hand and held it, and they walked back toward the boarding house together, and neither of them said anything for a while because there was nothing that needed to be said. "It's done," she said eventually. "It's done," he agreed. She let out a long breath. He had not fully understood until that moment how much she had been carrying, how long she had been living with the weight of it. The breath she let out was years of worry leaving her body. He put his arm around her, right there in the public street of Millhaven, Texas, in August of 1879, where anyone could see them and several people did, and she leaned into him and closed her eyes for a moment. "Take me home," she said. They were married in September in the Millhaven church, in a ceremony that the whole town attended. Mrs. Prout wore a new dress she had made especially for the occasion and cried freely and without apology. Pete Alcott stood up with Noah and shook his hand afterward and told him he was the luckiest fool he had ever had the pleasure of knowing, and Noah agreed with him completely. Lucy wore a dress the color of cream, with her dark auburn hair pinned up but with a few strands loose around her face in the way they always went by the end of the day, and she walked down the aisle of the small church with her chin up and her eyes on him and that smile, the full one, the real one, the one he had earned, and Noah thought he had never in his life seen anything so clear and sure and beautiful. She had arranged, before the wedding, for the Millhaven school to be taken over by a young woman named Clara Sims, who had completed teacher training in Austin and who came with excellent qualifications and a genuine love for the work. Lucy spent 3 weeks with Clara before the wedding, walking her through everything: the curriculum, the children's individual needs and strengths, the way to handle the Morris boys who were bright and difficult in equal measure, the parents to be especially encouraging with, and the ones who needed firmer handling. She handed over the school she had built and maintained with the care of a person who is not abandoning something, but entrusting it. The school in Harrow, 8 miles from Noah's ranch, was still without a teacher. Lucy had already written to the school board there. They settled into the ranch in the early autumn, and the life they built together had the particular quality of something that has been well planned, and yet is constantly surprising, which Noah thought was the best kind of life. She took to the ranch with an enthusiasm that delighted him. She was not a woman who stood apart from the work of a place. She wanted to understand the cattle operation, asked questions that were sharp and got sharper as she learned, and within a month she was keeping the books for the enterprise in a manner that was more organized than anything Noah had managed on his own, not because he was careless, but because she had a mind that found systems naturally and made them elegant. She also started teaching at the Harrow School in October. Riding the 8 miles each morning on a steady gray mare, she named Athena with an unapologetic decisiveness that made Noah laugh. She taught 4 days a week and managed the household and the books on the 5th, and on weekends she and Noah worked the ranch together with Pete, and in the evenings they sat on the porch he had built and watched the country go from light to dark. "You are not what I expected," she told him one such evening, which was an echo of what she had said to him in the Millhaven schoolhouse months before, but with a different color to it now. "What did you expect?" he said, as he had then. "I expected," she said carefully, "to be grateful, to feel fortunate in a practical sense, to have found a good arrangement with a decent man." She paused. "I did not expect to feel like this." "Like what?" he said quietly. She turned her head to look at him, and her eyes in the twilight were as warm and level and true as they had been the first time he saw them, but different now, rich with everything that had happened between them. "Like the best part of every day is whatever part of it I spend with you," she said. "Like I have been homesick my whole life and only just arrived." He reached for her hand and held it, and the night came down around them, gentle and full of stars, and the creek made its sound in the dark below the limestone shelf, and the live oaks stood along its banks as they had stood for 100 years and would stand for 100 more. Winter came to the hill country with a beauty that Lucy met with a clear-eyed wonder. She had not expected Texas winters to be lovely, having heard mostly of the heat, but the winter in the hills was cold and bright, with frost on the grass in the mornings, and a particular quality to the light that made everything look like it had been cleaned. She was pregnant by December, which they discovered at the turn of the year when the doctor from Harrow confirmed what Lucy had suspected for 3 weeks and had been holding quietly to herself, tasting the knowledge before she shared it. She told Noah on a Sunday morning in January, sitting at the kitchen table over coffee, matter-of-factly and with a joy that was contained and deep. He set down his coffee cup and looked at her and said nothing for a moment, and then he stood up and came around the table and held her, and she felt him breathe against her hair, and neither of them spoke, and the morning light came in through the kitchen window and lay across the floor in a long, warm band. "Are you well?" he said, eventually. "I am very well," she said. "I feel entirely like myself, only more so." He laughed, a sound that was soft and full, and she felt it in his chest against her cheek. The pregnancy gave Lucy the occasion to learn things about Noah that she had not yet seen, and what she found confirmed everything she already knew. He was attentive without being smothering. He watched her the way he watched his land, with a constant quiet care that was not anxious but present. He took on more of the outdoor work without being asked, and without making a point of it. He drove her to the doctor in Harrow himself at the regular intervals the doctor recommended, and sat in the waiting room and read a farming almanac with every appearance of calm, though she had learned to read him well enough by now to see the careful attention underneath. The winter passed. Spring arrived. Lucy stood at the creek in April with one hand on her growing abdomen and watched the water come over the limestone shelf and listened to the sound it made, and thought that she had been right, months ago, that the fear had changed shape and become anticipation, and that anticipation had changed shape and become this, something so warm and ordinary and extraordinary that she did not have an adequate word for it. Pete Alcott, who had been with Noah for years and who had accepted Lucy's arrival at the ranch, with the combination of wariness and respect of a man who had become accustomed to being the closest thing his employer had to a household, had by now fully revised his initial assessment. He had not said this directly because he was not a man who made declarations, but he had begun leaving small things at the kitchen door, early vegetables from the garden he kept, or a piece of well-repaired tack that he knew Lucy used for Athena, and Lucy had learned that these were Pete's language. "He brought onions," she told Noah one morning. "He likes you," Noah said. "I know," she said. "How long did it take him to like you?" "About 3 years," Noah said. "I'm ahead of schedule," she said, pleased. Their son was born in July, a robust and emphatic arrival who made his presence known from his first moment, with a voice that suggested he would not be easily overlooked. They named him Ezra, for Lucy's father, and the name sat on the child with a rightness that felt immediately true. Noah held his son for the first time in the quiet hour after everything had settled, sitting in the chair by the bedroom window with the July night spread out beyond it, and the weight and warmth of the child in his arms was like something he had not known he had been waiting for until it arrived. Lucy lay in the bed watching him, tired and clean and more herself than he had ever seen her, if that was possible, and she said, "Well, what do you think?" He looked up at her. His face was not doing anything controlled or careful. It was just open, entirely open, wearing everything it felt without arrangement. "I think he looks like you," he said. "He looks like both of us," she said. He has your chin. I have been told my chin is distinctive, he said. Stubborn, she said. The word is stubborn. That's not what I was told, he said. Then whoever told you was being kind, she said. And her smile was the full one, the real one, and even exhausted as she was, it transformed her face, and he loved it as much as he had ever loved anything. Ezra Donnelly grew from infant to baby to small boy with the cheerful determination of a child who has inherited the best qualities of two very capable people. He had his mother's eyes and her precision, and his father's steadiness and his capacity for quiet attention that could at any moment be broken by the impulse to run at something full tilt. Lucy continued teaching at the Harrow School until Ezra was nearly 2, and then arranged for a colleague to carry her classes while she was at home with him, with the clear intention of returning when the time was right. She also, during this period, wrote and completed a small book of lessons for rural schools, a practical manual organized around the challenges of teaching in one-room schoolhouses with mixed ages and limited materials, which she sent to a printer in Austin. The printer, who had an eye for practical value, agreed to publish it, and the book was received with more enthusiasm than Lucy had entirely anticipated, going through 2 printings in its first year. Noah read the finished volume from cover to cover and told her it was excellent, which she received with the particular pleasure of a person whose opinion of his own judgment was high enough that the compliment meant something. "You're not just saying that," she said. "Have I ever said something I didn't mean?" He said she thought about it. "No," she said, "that is actually one of the things I love best about you." "Only one," he said. She looked at him with those steady brown eyes and smiled in a way that told him there was a longer answer to that question that she was choosing to hold in reserve, and he loved her the more for it. In the spring of 1882, when Ezra was walking confidently and talking in the full sentences of a child who has been talked to properly since birth, Lucy told Noah she was expecting again. This time she told him immediately, without the weeks of private knowing, because she had learned by now that she did not want to hold anything back from him. He received the news with the same quality of response that she had come to understand was specific to him, the brief stillness, and then the warmth coming up through the stillness like the creek water over the limestone, carrying everything with it. "A brother or a sister for Ezra," he said. "He'll be opinionated about it either way," she said. "He's opinionated about everything," Noah said. "I have no idea where he gets it." She gave him a look that was worth more than a reply. Their daughter was born in November of 1882, and they named her Miriam, which had been Lucy's grandmother's name. And Miriam turned out to be everything Ezra was not in terms of temperament, which is to say that she was quiet and observant, and had a way of watching things with her dark eyes that made people instinctively speak more carefully in her presence. She and Ezra regarded each other with the cautious fascination of 2 very distinct personalities encountering each other across the complete novelty of sibling existence. And by the time Miriam was 6 months old, Ezra had appointed himself her primary guardian and interpreter, which was occasionally unnecessary, but always sincere. Pete Alcott, by this point a fixture of the family's life rather than simply a ranch hand, had developed the habit of arriving at the kitchen door on Sunday mornings with some pretext for conversation and staying for breakfast, a pattern that had evolved organically, and that no one was going to be the one to name directly. He held Miriam the first time with the careful solemnity of a man holding something valuable and fragile, and the baby looked up at his sun-weathered face with complete equanimity. "She's not scared of me," Pete said, sounding faintly surprised. "She's not scared of anything," Lucy said. "We're still working out whether that's a virtue or a problem." "It's a virtue," Noah said firmly. "Spoken like her father," Lucy said. Life on the Donnelly Ranch in the hill country of Texas in the early 1880s was not without its difficulties. There were hard winters and dry summers, and the constant work of maintaining a cattle operation against the unpredictabilities of weather and market. There were the broader troubles of the era, The conflicts over fencing and land access that were turning violent in some parts of Texas. The struggles of smaller operators against larger consolidated interests that had continued in various forms even after Fitch's legal defeat. The ever-present tension between the old ways of open range and the new realities of fenced land and changing cattle markets. Noah navigated these things with the same quality of careful, steady attention he brought to everything, and Lucy was beside him through all of it, not as a bystander but as a partner, the way she had always been, the way he had always meant when he said he was looking for someone to build something with. She returned to teaching at the Harrow School when Miriam was 18 months old, this time 3 days a week, and she brought a renewed perspective that her years with her own children had given her, an understanding of how small minds developed that made her already considerable teaching ability even stronger. The school board, which had been fortunate enough to have her from the beginning, understood what they had and gave her a great deal of latitude. Her book on rural education methods had by now reached schools as far as Oklahoma Territory and New Mexico, and she had received several letters from teachers who had used her methods and found them effective, letters that she read with a quiet satisfaction that was not quite pride and was something better. She wrote back to every one of them. In the summer of 1883, Noah added the rooms to the house that he had always planned to add. He did this with Pete's help, and the help of 2 men from Harrow who were carpenters by trade, and Lucy watched the construction with the attentiveness of a woman who had strong opinions about how interior space should be arranged, and who communicated those opinions clearly and early. The addition included a proper study with shelves for the books that had accumulated over 4 years of marriage into a collection that had long since outgrown the original 20 volumes, and a larger bedroom for the children, and a room that Lucy identified as hers for writing and correspondence, with a window that looked east toward the line of hills where the morning sun came up first. "A room of your own," Noah said, surveying the finished space with her. "A woman needs a room of her own," she said. "I have read as much and I am confirming it from experience." "Is that Middlemark?" he said. "That is my own observation," she said, "though Middlemark is also relevant." He leaned against the doorframe of her new room and looked at her standing in the middle of it with the morning light coming through the east window onto her face. And she was 31 years old, and she was more herself than she had been at any point since he met her, more Lucy than anything. And his feeling for her was so full and familiar and alive that it was not like the early urgency of wanting her but was deeper than that, settled into him, the way the creek was settled into its bed, going nowhere. Part of the landscape of him. "Lucy," he said. She turned from the window and looked at him, and she knew his face as well as she knew anything, and she saw what he was feeling. "Come here," she said. He crossed the room and she put her arms around him, and they stood in the room she would use for thinking and writing, in the house he had built and she had made into a home, on the land that was theirs together, with their children asleep in the next room and the morning coming through the window, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing that needed saying, because everything important had already been said. In letters and in conversations by a creek, and in the 400 ordinary days since then, that had been the actual content of the life they built together. The creek made its sound in the distance. The live oak stood along its banks. The bluebonnets were up in the far field, and the light was good, and there was work to be done, and there were books on the shelves and children to wake and feed and a world to tend, and it was all of it, every single ordinary, extraordinary part of it, exactly enough. Ezra Donnelly learned to read in the fall of 1884, at 4 years old, taught by his mother at the kitchen table with the same primer she had used with the children in Millhaven. And the morning he read his first complete sentence, slowly and with concentration, and then with a rush of triumph at the end that made him bang both hands on the table. Lucy sat across from him and said exactly what her father had always said when a student crossed that particular threshold. She said, "Now you know something that no one can ever take away from you." Ezra looked at her with his father's steady eyes and his mother's precision and said, "What else can't they take away?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled. "Let's find out," she said, and she turned the page. Noah, who had been in the doorway watching without being noticed, stayed very still and let the morning hold him in it. This particular morning in this particular house on this particular piece of the Texas Hill Country, and thought that he was the most fortunate man he had ever had the knowledge of, and that the fortune had come to him, because he had gotten on a horse and ridden 4 days in the spring of 1879 to argue with a letter. He thought, as he had thought many times in the years since, about Lucy's letter, its precision, its firmness. The particular phrase, "not in a position," and how much information had been compressed into those 4 words by a woman who chose her words the way she chose everything, with care and intention and a kind of honesty that was rarer than it should have been. He thought about standing in front of the schoolhouse door and watching her through the window before he knocked. He thought about the way she had stepped back and said, "You had better come in." He had come in. He had stayed. He was still here and she was still here, and every day that passed added another layer to something that had started as a careful hope and had become, quietly and surely and without a great deal of drama, the foundation of everything good in his life. He pushed off from the doorframe and went in and sat down at the table beside his son and said, "Read it again, from the beginning. I want to hear it." Ezra looked at him with the evaluating expression of a 4-year-old who is not entirely sure this is not a trick of some kind, and then he squared his small shoulders, the way his mother squared hers when she was about to say something true and clear, and he looked at the page. And he read it again, from the beginning, while the son moved through the kitchen and Lucy watched them both, and outside the window the creek moved over the limestone and made its good sound, and Millhaven and Fitch and the letter and the 4-day ride and all of it was part of the same story, the one that had led here, to this kitchen, to this morning, to these people who were her people and this place that was her place, and this life that was entirely and irrevocably and joyfully her own.